Hey guys, tonight we plunge into a subject that history books often skip but your body would never let you forget. You're walking barefoot on warm ancient tiles, the air thick with incense. And then it hits you. Not inspiration. Not divine purpose. Just a deeply human need that no pharaoh or philosopher ever escaped. Yes, tonight we're talking about how ancient civilizations went to the bathroom. From flushable thrones in the Bronze Age to Camille sponge wiping, you'll quickly realize two things. 1. Humans are endlessly inventive when desperate. And 2. Toilet paper is a luxury your ancestors could never have dreamed of. If you're listening on a porcelain throne right now, congratulations, you're living the dream. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where in the world everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the golden sands of ancient Egypt, the Nile glimmering under the sun like a snake made of silver. Around you, the palms sway in the wind, and somewhere nearby, the bleating of goats mingles with the rhythm of chisel on stone. You're in Thebes or perhaps Memphis and you suddenly feel it. That gentle pressure. A biological alarm bell from 3,000 years ago. But wait, what did an ancient Egyptian do in this situation? You might be surprised. Egypt wasn't all pharaohs and pyramids. It was also full of chamber pots, public toilets, and yes, crocodile dung. Let's start there. High-born Egyptians, wrapped in their finest linen, had access to what we might generously call toilet furniture. Clay or limestone seats with a central hole were placed over ceramic pots, often lined with sand. It was functional, if not glamorous. Some wealthier homes even had their own small bathroom spaces, tucked away like a sacred nook of privacy. The ventilation. Mostly open windows and incense. But for most Egyptians, farmers, workers, and laborers, it was a bit less elegant. You either dug a hole near your home or used the banks of the Nile. The river giveth, and the river taketh away, including your solid waste. Here's where things get particularly fragrant. Ancient texts suggest some Egyptians used mixtures of honey, natron, and animal dung as part of their cleaning and health routines. Crocodile dung, to be exact, has popped up in more than one ancient recipe. Supposedly it had magical or medicinal properties. Some scholars believe it was even used as a form of contraception. And you thought modern bathroom products had bold marketing. Historians still argue whether the use of dung was widespread or more symbolic part of spiritual or fertility rituals rather than daily hygiene. But the idea of handling something so pungent in such heat, that's a commitment to wellness you probably wouldn't survive. As for public restrooms, Egypt's temples and markets often had rudimentary shared latrines, rows of seats over trenches. These were sometimes paired with jars of water or sand for, let's say, final touches. And if you were particularly unlucky, you might be followed by a fly whisk bearer whose entire job was, well, pest control. Now let's talk toilet paper. Or the lack thereof. Egyptians employed a charming little technique involving smooth pebbles, shards of pottery called ostreka, or lion rags rinsed and reused. Yes, reused. Reduce, reuse, recycle may be modern phrasing, but the practice dates back millennia. Some bits of broken pottery even had writing on them. Imagine wiping with yesterday's tax records. Oh, and remember the cone-shaped things often seen on Egyptian art perched to top heads like little scopes of sherbet. Those weren't just for decoration. Some believe they were perfumed wax cones meant to melt slowly and release fragrance throughout the day. In a world without deodorant or regular showers, these might have made the bathroom experience marginally less tragic. And what about drainage? While not as advanced as the Romans would later create, Egyptian cities had basic canals and runoff systems. In elite homes, some archaeologists suggest there were rudimentary clay pipes under floors, sloping slightly to carry waste away. Others argue that these were more symbolic, like the idea of removing impurity in a spiritual sense. You stroll past one of those lavish tombs now, gazing at hieroglyphs carved with delicate precision. They tell stories of gods, of battles, of floods, and occasionally of bodily functions. Yes, the ancient Egyptian sense of humor extended to the latrine. One particularly cheeky ostracon found near Deir el Medina shows a cat serving a mouse whining in a toilet. Humor and hygiene went hand in hand. The deeper you wander into Egypt's sandy past, the clearer it becomes. Even a civilization obsessed with the afterlife couldn't escape the messy demands of the here and now. You feel oddly comforted by this. Maybe they weren't so different from us after all. Well, maybe a little different. I don't see you reaching for a crocodile today. You brush the sand off your lion tunic and step aboard a creaky wooden ship sailing across the Aegean Sea. Your destination. The lush, olive-strewn island of Crete, home to one of the most surprisingly sophisticated toilet cultures of the Bronze Age, the Minoans. The sun hangs low over the palace of Knossos, casting golden light across its fresco-covered walls. You step into its labyrinthine corridors, the same palace that might have inspired the myth of the Minotaur, and instead of a monster, you find a bathroom. Not just a hole in the floor, or a patch of gravel behind a bush. No, this is a room with a door, stone walls, and a seat carved directly into the structure, complete with a channel that leads somewhere. You kneel beside it, careful not to touch anything too intimately, and peer into the darkness of the ancient plumbing system. It's quiet, cool, and surprisingly clean. That's because this palace, over 3,500 years ago, had running water. Well, sort of. The Minoans engineered sloped terracotta pipes and vertical shafts that moved wastewater out of the palace complex. Gravity was their secret alley. The pipes led to central drains and sumps that directed everything: grain water, wash water, toilet waste far from the living quarters. It's likely the first recorded instance of a flushing toilet system in Europe. And you didn't even need a handle. All it took was a jug of water, and a slight tilt of the wrist. Historians still argue whether the Minoans invented this flushing system independently or adapted it from earlier Near Eastern techniques. Either way, it was leagues ahead of its time, and it would be thousands of years before some parts of Europe caught up again. The bathroom in Knossos is also remarkable for its size and privacy. Unlike the communal latrines of other ancient cultures, this one was meant for a single person, possibly even a queen. And it wasn't tucked away in some drafty basement. No, this lavatory was practically royal, decorated with vibrant wall art and located near a bathing area. Yes, the Minoans had bathtubs, too. You can almost hear the splash of warm water being poured, the scent of crushed herbs wafting through the air, and the echo of sandals tapping against stone. There's something shockingly modern about it all, right down to the attention to plumbing angles. And yet, not all Minoan facilities were so luxurious. Outside the palace, common homes likely had more humble arrangements: spits, maybe, or simple buckets emptied at regular intervals. But the palace set the gold standard. Quite literally. Some believe high-status toilets may have been decorated or painted, although the frescoes never show someone actually using them. Understandably. One curious find at Knossos included a drainage system that seems to have incorporated ash and even bits of broken pottery, perhaps to combat odors or aid in filtration. There's even a theory that Minoans occasionally used wine or diluted vinegar for washing. Not exactly a bidet, but a luxurious touch that screams, "We invented brunch before brunch existed." Then there's the toilet seat itself, flat, rectangular, and possibly cushioned with folded cloth. Unlike the Roman bench style we'll get to soon, this was more of a personal throne. You might have been able to sip pomegranate juice and contemplate linear inscriptions while doing your business. And let's not forget the palace drainage system doubled as a rainwater runoff. Meaning during the rainy season, the entire network got an unintentional flush. The Minoans weren't just practical, they were sustainable. You wander further through the complex, passing by what some think was a public restroom chamber. Shared facilities. AD. Or perhaps it was used ceremonially. Scholars are still puzzling over certain architectural features. One excavation turned up a curious room lined with clay tiles and channels but no clear seating. A changing room. A toilet. A trap for archaeologists. The debate rages on. But the takeaway is clear: for a people who worshipped nature, danced in labyrinths, and may or may not have fought mythical bulls, the Minoans took their sanitation seriously. More seriously than many medieval towns would, centuries later. You finally step back out into the Cretan sun, stomach grumbling from all the olive oil fumes wafting from nearby markets. And for just a moment, you feel a strange kind of envy. After all, you've probably waited in line for a crowded modern restroom that smelled far worse than this ancient setup. So next time someone jokes about primitive cultures, remember this: the Minoans had running water, flushing toilets, and elegantly tiled bathroom suites while much of future Europe was still figuring out how not to throw waste out the window. Literally. And sure, their civilization collapsed in a fiery swirl of earthquakes and volcanic dust, but at least they went out with style. And good plumbing. You slip into the cool, lamp-lit atrium of a grand Roman villa, the scent of olive oil torches mingling with distant laughter from the garden. There's no need to knock the sound of water trickling hints at what lies ahead. You're about to join an ancient social circle on the communal loo. Roman toilets weren't solitary retreats. Instead, you perch shoulder to shoulder with strangers on a long marble bench, holes carved in equal intervals like an awkward dinner table. There's no partition, just conversation. "How was your bath?" someone asks. "Fine, just got back from the forum." You laugh, pass your sponge on a stick, and rinse it in the gutter below. Welcome to public hygiene, Roman style. Historians still argue whether shared toiletry spaces boosted social cohesion or spread more germs than friendship, but there's no doubt Romans took pride in their plumbing. These latrines connected to underground sewers, flushed by a constant stream of water, sometimes even scented by rosemary or wine. Wealthier complexes used aqueduct-fed systems that sounded eerily modern. But whether this water was fresh or recycled would spark lively debate for centuries. One standout feature: the tersorium, a cameel sponge fixed on a stick and dipped in water or vinegar. You pass it gently between your companions. Wash, dip again. The phrase sharing is caring took on a literal meaning here. Imagine telling that to your modern roommate or your partner. Cringe and jiggle. But it gets quirkier. Some latrines included goddess Fortuna's shrine. You settled beneath her statue bestowing luck, and hope for a clean exit. Few claimed it cured ailments, but Romans loved mixing ritual with reality. After all, prayer probably didn't clog the pipes. Here's a mainstream fact: the cloaca maxima in Rome was among the world's earliest sewage systems, channeling waste from latrines and baths into the Tiber. Impressive, though smellier than a compost heap in July. Still, it kept the city remarkably clean for its size. Scholars still debate the engineering origin, so is it constructed by Etruscans or Roman workshop masters? It doesn't matter that much now, you're just focused on not dropping your sponge. For a fringe twist, archaeologists found inscriptions under some benches, graffiti of insults, political jabs, even doodles of phallic cartoons. Romans loved bathroom humor. Who knew you'd be reading ancient tweets while mid-duty? As you finish, you swing your sponge stick in the communal gutter. You wonder, would you share this tool with your friends today? Probably not. But you can't help smiling at the intimacy of it. It's a restroom, yes, but also a forum for small talk, gossip, and perhaps strategy for tomorrow's Senate debate. Wrapping up, you appreciate the engineering, carved marble, flowing aqueduct water, sculptures overhead. It's not just hygiene, it's civic pride. And shut-eye is never far behind. But before you drift off, you remain grateful for toilet paper, private stalls, though part of you wonders if you've missed out on a certain Roman camaraderie. A sponge stick chat with a neighborless gourmet than juicy office gossip. Maybe so. You squint against the bright sunlight of a dusty Greek agora. Merchants shout prices, figs and olives spill from woven baskets, and somewhere nearby, a philosopher is mid-lecture about the nature of truth. But you're looking for the nearest toilet, and let's just say, you're not hoping for luxury. Ancient Greece, for all its architectural brilliance and philosophical musings, wasn't exactly flush with good bathroom options. Especially not for the average citizen. Unlike their Roman successors, the Greeks never developed a widespread sewer system. Instead, their toileting methods were more minimal. You find yourself at a gymnasium, a bustling social hub where young men trained, debated, and occasionally relieved themselves. Near the edge of the courtyard is a modest structure, a small room with a stone slab lining one wall, punctuated with holes. No privacy. No doors. You simply squat, do your business, and move on. Maybe flex your biceps on the way out to distract from the awkward eye contact. Here comes the fun part: wiping. No sponge here. Instead, you're handed a few smooth ceramic discs called passoi. They're not unlike flattened skipping stones. The Greeks believed these were the superior wiping method, and there's even evidence that some of them were inscribed with enemies' names, because nothing says revenge like a metaphorical smear. Historians still argue whether passoi were used dry or dipped in water first. Either way, they were reused, cleaned, and stacked neatly beside the latrine. Efficient. Maybe. Comfortable. Let's say exfoliating. Then there's the alternative, the Ostrecken. These were small pottery shards, some with writing. You pick one up and realize it's a fragment of a broken wine jug. Very sustainable. Very scratchy. And yes, these objects were often repurposed from political graffiti or legal documents. Imagine wiping with last week's court verdict. There's something poetically dismissive about that. The Greeks also had chamber pots for indoor use, especially in wealthier homes. These were emptied into cesspits or thrown into the street, sometimes literally. One well-known Athenian court case involved a man whose family member was allegedly injured by waste tossed from an upstairs window. Hygiene was, shall we say, a shared civic experiment. But back to the gymnasium. After your business is done, you rinse your hands at a fountain, probably cold water from a clay spout, and maybe dab some olive oil on your arms for good measure. Ancient Greek hygiene wasn't always about being clean, it was about balance, beauty, and bodily function. The body and mind in harmony, even when squatting in a corner. Quirky fact incoming: some Greek medical texts suggest that proper bowel habits were essential for virtue. Diogenes, the famously unbothered philosopher, allegedly relieved himself in public to protest society's artificial norms. You may not go that far, but you do feel a strange kinship with his brutal honesty. As for privacy, forget about it. In ancient Athens, the idea of individual stalls or modesty curtains was laughable. You did your thing where everyone else did theirs. But the lack of shame had a silver lining: bodily functions weren't taboo, they were just life. Still, you can't help but wince slightly as you try the passoi for yourself. Perhaps there was a reason so many Greek statues have that pained, noble expression. They weren't contemplating mortality. They were remembering bathroom breaks. The smell, the heat, the coarse texture of terracotta, it's all part of the Greek experience. You step out into the agora again, feeling a bit more exfoliated. You pass a stall selling amphorae and hear someone quoting Socrates. You resist the urge to say, "He who wipes with pottery learns to cherish the smooth." And somewhere in the back of your mind, you file away a new appreciation for quilted toilet paper. You might never take it for granted again. The sun bakes the brick pathways of Babylon as you make your way through narrow alleys lined with mud-plastered homes and grand ziggurats towering above like divine staircases. Here in ancient Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing and law codes, people also spent a fair amount of time thinking about where to go and what to do when nature called. You pause at the threshold of a monist home. Step inside, and you'll find a tidy courtyard, a shaded roof, and in one quiet corner, a toilet. Not a pit in the dirt, but a built structure baked brick or stone with a seat carved into it. Below, a vertical shaft leads to a cesspit or a basic drainage system. This wasn't just a hole in the floor, it was a throne with a purpose. Mesopotamians, particularly the wealthier urban dwellers, built their toilets over these vertical chutes that directed waste away from living areas. Archaeologists have even uncovered early clay pipe systems in homes from the city of Eshnunna, dating to around 2000 BC. It wasn't common for every house, but for those who had it, it meant fewer flies, fewer smells, and marginally fewer awkward encounters with puddles. Now, we don't have many surviving details about toilet paper, if that's even the right term here, but it's thought they used water, leaves, or cloth scraps. Some early tablets mention the use of soft clay balls or palm fibers. Yes, palm fibers. A little spiky for comfort, you think, but maybe that's how they got things done quickly. You shift uneasily at the thought, and look around. In wealthier households, the bathroom may have been semi-enclosed for privacy. In more humble homes, the latrine was likely just an extension of the kitchen courtyard, convenient for emptying waste, if not exactly an ideal dinner view. One curious find: mirrors. Some toilet areas had polished metal or obsidian mirrors nearby, mounted on walls or propped on stands. Were they for grooming? For checking your toga fringe? Or, more ominously, to reflect the soul during vulnerable moments? Historians still argue whether these mirrors were purely cosmetic or had ritual significance. Either way, few things are more disconcerting than locking eyes with yourself mid-squat. And what about the public? In dense cities like Ur and Nippur, communal toilets may have existed in marketplace areas or temple precincts. One large structure uncovered near a public square shows signs of regular washing and drainage, leading some scholars to suggest it doubled as a communal restroom. There's even evidence of gender separation though. Let's be honest, any wall would be a welcome divider in this climate. Sanitation was serious business here. Babylonian law, especially the famous Code of Hammurabi, doesn't explicitly mention toilets, but many other legal codes of the region stress cleanliness and public responsibility. If your waste made its way into someone else's home, the consequences could be less saleless than pleasant, and sometimes literal. Fines, shaming, or public beatings. Not quite the customer service hotline we have today. And here's a little fringe detail for your dreams tonight. Mesopotamian exorcists had spells specifically designed for bathroom mishaps. There were incantations to ward off spirits that might enter through the privy, as well as remedies for constipation, diarrhea, or you guessed it, huntings. The bathroom was considered a spiritually vulnerable space. Demons like Lamashtu were said to linger near latrines, waiting for careless humans. Think of them as the world's first bathroom critics. You step back out into the golden heat, passing a scribe hunched over a clay tablet. Perhaps his recording the results of last night's lentil stew. You never know. You pause at a public fountain to splash water on your hands. Mesopotamians were big on ritual cleanliness, especially before prayer or temple visits. And in temples themselves, there's evidence of sacred latrines reserved for priests. Going to the bathroom was part of purification before communing with the gods. Can't offer incense if you're spiritually and bodily unclean. It all begins to feel oddly modern. Private restrooms for the elite, communal setups for the public, plumbing innovations, and superstitions about ghosts and germs. Swap the cuneiform tablets for porcelain signs, and you'd barely notice the difference. Well, except for the palm fiber wipes. Those, you'd probably notice. You find yourself walking barefoot along the dusty lanes of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization. The air is dry and still, and the sun reflects sharply off the baked mud brick walls that form a silent, orderly grid. It's eerily quiet, like a ghost town suspended in time. But then again, you're here for something timeless, the call of nature. You duck into one of the rectangular houses, stepping carefully over the threshold stone, and immediately spot something curious: a small, raised platform in the corner of a side room. It's a toilet. And not just a hole in the ground, but a purpose-built seat connected to a vertical chute that disappears into the wall and connects to a sewer channel outside. Yes, the people of the Indus Valley nearly 4,500 years ago had indoor toilets and complex drainage systems that would put many later civilizations to shame. These toilets weren't just for the elite, either. Nearly every house excavated in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had some form of sanitation facility. Some were simple pit latrines, while others were sophisticated setups built over brick-lined sewers with gently sloping channels. Wastewater flowed out of homes and into covered drains along the streets lined with bricks and fitted with inspection holes. You could almost imagine a sanitation worker of the time lifting a heavy brick lid to peer inside. Historians still argue whether these systems were maintained centrally or managed household by household. But either way, the commitment to urban hygiene was unprecedented. especially when you consider that many medieval cities wouldn't see anything like it for another 3,000 years. You step outside and follow the path of one of these open drains. It curves neatly along the base of the houses and converges at a central point. Rainwater and wastewater were separated. Storm drains were kept clear. Some houses even had sump pits basins that collected sludge and could be cleaned out. Someone, somewhere, had that job. Let's all take a moment of silence for that forgotten soul. But it wasn't just about removing waste, it was also about managing water. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a giant public water tank, likely used for ritual purification, is the most iconic example. Nearby were changing rooms, and what many believe were adjacent latrines. A dip in the sacred pool. A visit to the luites, all part of the cleans. When it came to wiping, the evidence gets murky. No pasoi. No sponges. No carved pottery shards. But based on regional flora, scholars suggest they might have used smooth stones, leaves, or rinsing water stored in jars near the toilet area. Whatever they used, they kept the waste away from the water sources. Wells were strategically placed away from latrines, and many homes had their own private bathing areas. Sanitation wasn't just a convenience, it was culture. You duck into another home, this one with a more elaborate bathroom, raised brick floor, sloped toward a drain, with grooves that likely guided water outward. There's no faucet, of course, but you can imagine someone pouring water from a pot, letting it flow and carry the filth away. Everything about this place whispers intentionality. They weren't improvising, they were planning. And here's the twist: there's no evidence of palaces, temples, or royal tombs in these cities. No pharaohs. No pyramids. Just civic planning and clever plumbing. It's like the Indus Valley folks decided cleanliness and order were more important than crowns and ceremonies. Imagine that. Quirky detail time. Some archaeologists found tiny figurines with oversized eyes and peaceful postures. Were they gods? Were they bathroom guardians? Historians still debate their exact role. But placing a little terracotta figure near your toilet suddenly doesn't seem so strange. It's like a squat Buddha watching over your squat. You sit for a moment on one of the reconstructed platforms. It's surprisingly comfortable. The bricks are worn smooth with time. A breeze moves through the open doorway, and you hear the distant trickle of water running through a still functioning drain. Yes, thousands of years later, the water still flows. You realize something profound. These ancient people may not have left behind great monuments, but they gave us something even more lasting: proof that good plumbing is a form of civilization. That urban design begins with the basic needs. And that sometimes, the most advanced idea is simply getting waste to go away quietly. So next time your modern toilet clogs and you grumble about it, remember, the citizens of Mohenjo-Daro were handling their business in 2600 BAS with more grace than many cities did in 1600s. And they did it barefoot, with no air freshener. You wander through a narrow alley in a bustling Chinese city, perhaps Luoyang during the Han Dynasty, or maybe a small village nestled among misty hills. The aroma of steamed buns, dried fish, and fermented tofu clings to the air. You pass under red paper lanterns and dodge a cart full of turnips before pausing in front of an inconspicuous doorway. Tucked behind it is something essential, though not often discussed in ancient poetry. A chamber pot. Yes, welcome to the world of ancient Chinese toileting, where practical ingenuity met the unglamorous necessities of daily life. Chamber pots by Yuan Chinese were a central fixture in nearly every household. Chelao, curved, sometimes decorated with dragons or flowers, these pots served everyone from emperors to peasants. If you were lucky, yours had a lid. And what happened after the pot was full? Well, if you were in a wealthy household, a servant would discreetly carry it away and empty it into a cesspit or compost heap. If you were anyone else, you'd haul it out yourself, perhaps under cover of darkness, and dump the contents in designated waste areas or, less preferably, into canals or rivers. But the real insects of this system were the night soil collectors. You imagine them now, trundling down the streets in the early hours, wooden yokes over their shoulders, balancing two sloshing buckets of human waste. They were essential workers long before the term existed. Their cargo. Fertilizer. Yes, in ancient China, human waste was not discarded, it was repurposed. This night soil, as it was called, was prized by farmers, especially in rice-growing regions. Rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, it helped crops thrive. Cities ran on the exchange of food for waste, forming a sort of circular economy where nothing went unused. Historians still argue whether this practice began as a planned agricultural innovation or evolved from necessity and scarcity. Either way, it worked. For millennia. In larger cities, public toilets were common, simple wooden or brick stalls where people relieved themselves into pits or jars. Some were pay to use. You hand over a small copper coin and are given access to a shared stall, where a pot has already seen too much. Inside, you squat over a ceramic bowl or a hole in the floor. The posture's familiar now. You've become a sort of time-traveling squatter. But here in ancient China, posture wasn't just biology, it was philosophy. The act of elimination was sometimes considered part of K regulation life force. A good squat meant good health. Now comes the question, how did people wipe? One answer is bamboo. Thin sticks or spatulas, smooth and reusable, often rinsed in nearby water jars. Some were carved and even inscribed. You wonder whether calligraphy practice began here. Other options included leaves, paper, yes, China invented it, or old cloth. By the Tang dynasty, paper became more common for hygiene. Records mention specially made paper for the imperial household, perfumed, soft, and reserved for noble bottoms. Meanwhile, common folk made do with rougher scraps. It's hard to overstate how revolutionary that was. Imagine inventing toilet paper and then gunpowder. Priorities. In rural areas, you pass by outhouses made of wood or stone, with slanted roofs and small windows for airflow. Beneath them, compost pits churned with activity, human waste, straw, kitchen scraps, all breaking down into something that made the soil richer and the vegetables greener and tastier. Probably. You enter a scholar's home. Is crouched over his desk, brush in hand, composing a poem about moonlight on plum blossoms. Nearby, tucked beneath a screen, sits his chamber pot painted with cranes and clouds. Even the bathroom accessories were artistic. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some Qing-era children's chamber pots were shaped like ducks or frogs. Adorable and practical. One child's potty was even shaped like a peach, symbolizing longevity. Perhaps the secret to a long life was never holding it in too long. But bathroom culture wasn't just about function. In Taoist practices, bodily cleanliness was part of spiritual alignment. Some temples had special latrines for monks, aligned with the cardinal directions. Even defecating, it seems, had cosmic implications. You stroll past a communal latrine now, just outside a tea house. It's a low structure, a trench covered by planks, with a screen for partial privacy. A woman rinses her hands with tea water left over from guests because yes, water was precious. So precious that wastewater from rinsing rice or vegetables was often reused in the latrine before finally being poured onto the fields. And so, the system turns. Chamber pot to farm, crop to table, food to body, body to pot. You're part of the loop now, if only for a moment. As you walk away, the sound of wooden clogs echoes behind you. A night soil collector begins his morning rounds, pausing only to sip tea from a chipped cup before hoisting his buckets with a grunt. You tip your imaginary hat to him. Civilization runs on many things. But in ancient China, one of them was unquestionably quietly human waste. You step carefully onto a floating platform nestled among reeds and canals. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, the great Aztec city built atop a lake. It's early morning, and the mist rises from the water like a silk scarf being pulled from the earth. All around you, neat rows of China Pasto's famous man-made garden islands stretch out into the shimmering blue. A place of beauty, of ingenuity, of practical bathroom solutions. You pass a fisherman gutting tilapia, two children chasing a heron with reckless glee, and a priest in feathered headdress calmly sweeping the temple steps. Life is bustling, sacred, and astonishingly clean. That's right, the Aztecs took hygiene very seriously. You veer down a canal path and find a small wooden latrine perched over the water. It's a simple structure, slatted floor, thatched roof, and a modest bucket of water beside it. It may not look like much, but it's functional and it's part of a system. Waste dropped into the canal wasn't just carried off by the current, it had a destination. Because like the Chinese, the Aztecs knew the value of night soil. Here's the scoop literally. Human waste was collected and sold as fertilizer. Boats drifted from island to island, gathering the night's output and delivering it. The farms growing maize, chili peppers, and tomatoes. The result? Some of the most productive agriculture in the ancient world. And hey, your taco toppings had to come from somewhere. Historians still argue whether the waste was treated or composted before use. Some sources suggest it was left to ferment in pits, mixed with ash and other organic materials. Others think it was applied directly to soil. Either way, the cycle was efficient, if not exactly fragrant. Now, let's talk communal toilets. Aztec markets, especially in Tlatelolco, had thousands of daily visitors, and shared latrines were strategically placed around the city. These weren't palatial, but they were well ventilated and maintained. Public facilities were often constructed over canals or pits, with attendants who kept things orderly and ensured nobody abused the space. Hygiene had social importance. Foul behavior wasn't just rude, it was ritually polluting. And cleaning up, nature lent a hand. The Aztecs used a variety of natural materials to stay fresh: corn husks, smooth leaves, and fibers from the amol plant, a kind of soap plant whose roots could be mashed and used as a cleansing agent. This lathered slightly, and when combined with water from the canal, it formed a kind of protobidet system. You crouch beside a chinampa and try a cool, a little gritty, but surprisingly effective. It smells faintly like aloe and river mint. Fun fact, the word amali from the Nahuatl language means soap. It's where some modern Mexican soap brands still get their name. Talk about lasting legacy. You're now in the noble quarter, where stone buildings glisten with embedded obsidian. Here, toilet arrangements were even more advanced. Wealthy homes had private outhouses with smooth stone seats, covered trenches, and sometimes even attendants. The Emperor Montezuma himself was said to have an entire team responsible for handling his chamber pots lined with fragrant herbs, of course. In the palace, the use of perfumes and incense extended to the bathroom. After doing their business, nobles might use flower-infused cloths or scented smoke to mask odors. And the chamber pots, carved from fine pottery or stone, shaped like jaguars, birds, or mythic beasts. It was art. With a lid. You walk past a communal bathhouse near a temple complex. Here, bathers sit in shallow pools, washing with suds and chatting about the next ritual or gossip from the priesthood. The toilets nearby are basic but clean. Hygiene, especially before entering sacred space, was both physical and spiritual. And now for your quirky tidbit, Aztec toilet graffiti. Now, really. Carved into a few public structures are majestic figure style of people squatting or washing. Some scholars argue these were instructional, maybe even humorous. A few include speech glyphs that translate loosely to "don't be filthy" or "wash before you eat," the ancient equivalent of "employees must wash hands before returning to work." You sit on a stone bench overlooking the lake and watch a canoe glide past. Inside, two workers balance a clay pot full of, well, let's say the harvest. They wave cheerfully as they pass, unfazed. This is life. Functional, rhythmic, connected. What strikes you most is the lack of shame. Toileting in Aztec society wasn't something hidden or awkward. It was part of the grand cycle of nourishment and return. Eat the maize. Digest the maize. Feed the maize. There was dignity in it. Even reverence. As the sun climbs higher and the city buzzes with morning energy, you step into a small outhouse behind a vendor's stall. The floor is sweat. A small bowl of water waits beside a soap root. A bundle of fresh leaves lies on a wooden stool. It's not luxurious, but it is clean and cared for. You exhale, crouch, and think, maybe civilization isn't measured by monuments, but by how kindly it handles its messes. A stiff wind rustles the flags atop the castle tower as you climb a narrow stone stairwell, spiraling higher through damp, echoing passages. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where dragons may be mythical, but poor sanitation is all too real. You're in a medieval castle now, perhaps somewhere in England or France, and the draft slipping through the arrow slits isn't the only thing making you shiver. You reach a small wooden door along the outer wall. Open it, and voil, a garderobe. The name itself feels cozy, like a place to hang cloaks. But here's the surprise: it's a toilet. A medieval vertical drop chute, built into the castle wall, leading straight down to the open air to a pit, a moat, or a large, smelly heap if the architects were feeling fancy. You peek over the edge and see daylight far below, along with the slow squelch of decay. The smell is medieval. No plumbing. No flushing. Just gravity and prayers. You take a careful seat on the stone slab with its roughly carved hole and try not to think too much about aim. There's no railing. No lid. Just a brisk wind on your royal posterior, and a sudden awareness that pigeons may be flying directly underneath you. Still, there's charm in the simplicity. The garderobe was considered high-tech at the time, a hygienic luxury. And best of all, it kept the smells mostly outside the castle. Mostly. Now here's a fun, if slightly itchy detail: people sometimes hung their clothes in the garderobe. Why? Because the ammonia-rich fumes killed fleas and lice. So yes, your doublet may reek of human waste, but at least you weren't scratching all night. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or just a desperate last resort. Either way, it gives new meaning to the term wardrobe malfunction. Down in the castle village things were grimmer. Most homes had simple wooden or stone benches over pits. Some residents used chamber pots, emptied into the street at regular intervals. Or not so regular. In cities like London, cries of "guard loo" warned unsuspecting passers-by that a pot was being emptied from a window. The phrase likely evolved into loo, the British term for toilet. See, language is beautiful. In cities, cesspits under homes were common. These were cleaned by gone farmers, a brave and truly underappreciated profession. Imagine climbing into a shoulder-deep pit of medieval sewage with nothing but a bucket and a prayer. These workers operated at night and were banned from living within city walls. Talk about a rough commute. Bathhouses, for those lucky enough to access them, offered some relief. But by the later medieval period, public bathing declined, partly due to concerns about morality, partly due to plague fears. Cleanliness became less about health and more about reputation. Smelling too nice could be suspicious. A clean tunic. Witchcraft, obviously. And wiping. Let's just say options were rustic. Moss, hay, straw, handfuls of grass, whatever was on hand, literally. In winter, even snowballs were fair game. You try not to imagine it too vividly. Wealthier households may have had lion cloths, washed and reused. But the average peasant, nature provided, and didn't ask for feedback. Toilet sharing was common. Families, workers, even soldiers in camp all squatted side by side. There's little evidence of modesty. In fact, some castles had multi-seater garderobes for communal use. You picture a medieval brainstorming session happening mid-evacuation. Truly multitasking. Quirky graffiti has even been found in castle latrines, crude drawings, names, and insults scratched into the stone. One reads, "Here sat Geoffrey the Tall, and left a stench to make devils fall." You can't help but smile. Some things like bathroom humor transcend centuries. And what of the moats? Yes, some castle toilets drain directly into moats. Romantic swan-filled waters by day, raw sewage collector by night. Which also meant attacking from the moat side was less appealing. Why storm the walls when the base smells like a battlefield of its own? Yet despite all this, the medieval world had a certain dignity to its dirt. There were rituals like washing hands before meals, saying prayers before and after relieving oneself, and wearing special cloaks to preserve modesty. Latrines were sometimes given euphemistic names, like the Little House, or the Quiet Place, which is ironic, given the groaning wood and echoing splash that likely followed. You descend from the tower, stepping past a cart of hay and a grumpy goose. A servant carries a chamber pot, wrinkling her nose. In the great hall, the nobility dine on trenchers of meat and ale. You wonder if they know their garderobe empties directly into the courtyard below. Then again, maybe ignorance was bliss. Or at least less smelly. As you step into the courtyard breeze, you can't help but admire how medieval folks made do with courage, community, and just enough engineering to keep the filth from overwhelming the feast. You close the heavy castle gate behind you and step into a different world entirely, one of gentle streams, rustling bamboo, and the rhythmic tapping of Geta sandals on polished wood. You're in Japan now, in the Heian period perhaps, or maybe Edo, walking beneath a pale pink wash of falling cherry blossoms. And here, going to the bathroom is an art. Everything in old Japan seems to have a place. Stones in the garden, slippers by the door, and seven waste. The Japanese didn't simply dig pits and hope for the best. They integrated toileting into the landscape, their architecture, even their philosophy. You enter a traditional wooden house and are immediately asked to remove your shoes. Soft tatami mats muffle your steps. Down a hallway, past a sliding paper door, you find a small structure separated slightly from the main house. It's the benja, the lavatory. Separate for hygiene, yes, but also to maintain the tranquility of the home. You slide the door aside and step into a minimal, tidy space. A low wooden seat stands over a hole leading to a deep composting pit. A ladle of water rests in a basin beside it. No clunky plumbing. No flushing. Just gravity and quiet design. This is a squat toilet used for centuries in Japan, and still common in some areas. It's simple, ergonomic, and surprisingly modern in its low-tech elegance. In earlier periods, these pits were cleaned regularly, and the contents were collected and sold as fertilizer like in China. The practice, called shimago, literally fertilizer from the bottom, was a thriving part of the rural economy. Farmers would sometimes pay landlords for the right to collect household waste, especially from wealthier homes. Your poop was a hot commodity. Historians still debate the exact origins of the system. Was it always so organized? Or did it develop slowly as towns grew? What's not in question is that, for centuries, Japan had one of the most efficient sanitation to agriculture loops in the world. Now, let's talk wiping. In early Japan, people used sticks called shikithin, smooth wooden paddles, sometimes carved from cedar or bamboo. These were washed and reused, and occasionally decorated with ink or carved patterns. Some were even passed down, like heirlooms. You try not to think too hard about that. Later, paper became more common. Japan, after all, was one of the earliest cultures to mass-produce paper. But not all paper was equal. Ruler types were used for bathroom needs, sometimes recycled from other writing or wrapping uses. Monks in particular valued cleanliness, and temples often had dedicated latrines, some with clever drainage systems using rainwater and gravity. A curious thing happens in the Edo period. Public toilets begin to multiply. In towns like Edo, modern Tokyo, communal outhouses were established in marketplaces, near riverbanks, and in residential quarters. Some were gender-specific, others general use. A few were even maintained by neighborhood groups, early public utilities before indoor plumbing. You walk through a quiet alley now and pass a row of wooden doors. Behind one, a person steps out carrying a bucket, which they pour into a larger barrel marked with a calligraphic symbol for field use. The system is smooth, dignified, and well fragrant, but not foul. And what about toilets for the elite? In samurai estates or noble homes, latrines were often more elaborate. Some were housed in tiny detached garden pavilions, with polished floors, ornamental woodwork, and incense burners to keep the space serene. In fact, it was considered polite to excuse oneself not with words, but with a slight bow, and a discreet slip away to the toilet room. You pause now in a Zen temple garden. A monk sweeps a stone path. You notice a small structure tucked behind a bamboo screen. Inside, a composting toilet. Near the door is a wash basin filled with clear water and a ladle. The simplicity is almost sacred. And that brings us to a key cultural note. In Japan, cleanliness isn't just practical, it's spiritual. The Shinto belief system centers on purity, both physical and moral. Waste, while necessary, must be respectfully contained and removed. Latrines were ritually clean. Some households sprinkled salt outside toilet doors to ward off impurities, both literal and spiritual. Your quirky detail of the day. In the Edo period, some geisha houses had toilets with musical elements, bells or water chimes triggered when someone used the facilities, partially to mask sound and partially for elegance. Yes, even going to the bathroom could be a delicate performance. You crouch beside a stone toilet basin in a rural tea house. A window lets in dappled light through a paper screen. You hear birds, distant temple bells, and the soft gurgle of water. There's no harsh odor. No flush. Just stillness. You rinse your hands in a ceramic basin, dry them on a cloth towel, and slip your feet back into your indoor slippers. The world feels quieter now. Somehow more intentional. And as you walk through the moss-lined path back to the main road, you realize ancient Japan didn't treat the bathroom as a necessary evil. It treated it as a moment of calm. A pause. Now you're somewhere deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the air thick with moisture, and the scent of crushed leaves underfoot. You hear the rhythmic call of a howler monkey in the canopy above, and through the vines, you spot stone steps, steep and wide, leading to the towering structure of a Mayan temple. You've entered the world of the ancient Maya. But don't let the grandeur fool you. Even here, amidst sacred pyramids and celestial calendars, people had to go. And just like in every other ancient society, they figured it out in stylian with some fascinating twists. You step behind a ceremonial platform and find what appears to be a simple stone structure, low, discreet, shaded. It's a toilet. Or at least, the remains of one. A flat slab with a smooth circular hole, positioned over a pit. In some cases, these were lined with stone or clay. And in elite homes, built into private rooms with adjoining water basins, the Maya understood the need to keep their living areas clean. Waste was collected and either buried in specially designated latrines or used in composting systems similar to those in Asia. Evidence suggests that elite households like those of scribes, priests, or nobles had designated sanitation spaces built right into the architecture. But here's the twist. For the Maya, elimination wasn't just physical. It was also spiritual. In Mayan cosmology, bodily functions including sweating, vomiting, and defecating were tied to rituals of purification and balance. There are glyphs in ancient texts referring to emptying oneself before important ceremonies, suggesting that entering a sacred space required full-body preparation. Historians still argue whether some temple facilities were used solely for physical needs, or if they doubled as purification chambers. And remember the famous Temazcal, the Mayan sweat bath. These steam rooms weren't just spas. They were used to cleanse body and soul before battle, childbirth, or ritual. Sometimes, these bathhouses had adjoining latrines or drainage trenches, turning the whole experience into a kind of early wellness retreat known as the cucumber water. As for wiping, the evidence is, once again, leafy. Scholars believe the Maya used broad, soft leaves or plant fibers soaked in water. Some even point to the bark of the emmet tree's smooth when peeled and dampened as a likely candidate. Not exactly charmant ultra, but thoughtful nonetheless. You now find yourself in the marketplace of a city like Tegel or Kham. Here, among the rows of maize cakes and painted ceramics, public toilets were likely available in the form of pit latrina shallow holes dug at the outskirts, sometimes screened by woven mats. You hear the buzz of insects and the chatter of merchants. Hygiene wasn't perfect, but it was managed. You get the sense that order, in all things, mattered. Quirky detail time. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery vessels in burial sites that some believe were ceremonial chamber pots. A few even contained remnants of copal incense, suggesting that in death, as in life, waste was accompanied by purification. Whether symbolic or literal, it's a fragrant reminder that even the afterlife required a bathroom break. And what about toilet placement? Many Mayan buildings were constructed with a clear sense of orientation: north, south, sun, moon, rain. Some latrines were placed on the western edge of homes or compounds, possibly associated with the underworld. In Mayan thought, the west represented the place where the sun died each day, and thus, where earthly things were returned to the gods. You crouch beside a half-buried latrine stone now, overgrown with moss and ferns. You run your hand over the smooth surface and feel the faint etchings of symbols long forgotten. Perhaps they marked ownership. Or maybe, just maybe, they were a polite way of saying occupied. You pause to take in the jungle air, humid, green, buzzing with invisible life, and reflect on how even the most mysterious civilizations still had very human routines. The Maya watched the stars, built observatories, and plotted solar eclipses. And still, they needed a place to sit down and reflect in silence. Back in the temple courtyard, you spot a group of workers hauling ash from a fire. Ash was often used to cover pit latrines, absorbing odor, speeding decomposition, and making the space more bearable. A clever, low-tech solution to a universal issue. And then there's the ceremonial angle. Some scholars suggest that for priests, fasting and cleansing involved controlled purging of the body. It wasn't about shaming, it was about starting fresh. Entering the sacred with nothing left behind. Quite literally. So you rise, dust off your knees, and wander through the vine-draped ruins with a new appreciation. The Maya weren't just stargazers and scribes, they were practical architects of the most fundamental parts of life. The sun blazes over the flat rooftops and ziggurats of Ur, and a warm breeze stirs dust from the streets as you make your way past a bustling row of merchants selling barley bread, dates, and somewhat less romantically sacks of soap. That's right, today in ancient Mesopotamia, you're going to learn how the early Babylonians and Sumerians kept themselves clean and dealt with their dirty business. You duck beneath a stone archway into a courtyard, where a square platform in the corner catches your eye. It's not for ritual. It's not for baking. It's a toilet. A real, brick-lined one, perched above a simple drain or cesspit. Some of these early toilets, especially in homes of the moderately wealthy, were connected to vertical shafts that led directly into the city's rudimentary sewage channels. Gravity did most of the work. But sanitation here wasn't just about engineering. It was about order. The Mesopotamians were pioneers of writing, law, and city planning. Naturally, they extended that same meticulous approach to, well, poop. In the ancient cities of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, whole neighborhoods were built with water channels running along the streets. Wastewater from kitchens and toilets was channeled through clay pipes or stone conduits. Some scholars believe that certain city blocks had community latrines with shared access to these waste channels, though evidence is patchy. Historians still argue whether these were true public toilets or private household additions built very close together. As for wiping, the options were humble but effective. Handfuls of straw, reeds, or soft woven scraps. In hot, dry summers, sand might also have played a role. Abrasive, yes, but available in abundance. Your quirky tidbit today. Soap. The Mesopotamians were among the first people to create soap-like substances. By mixing animal fat with wood ash and water, they produced an early cleanser, mainly used for laundering clothes, but possibly for personal washing as well. Some texts even mention cleansing as part of ritual purity before entering temples, making hygiene not only sensible, but sacred. But there's more. In some temple complexes, like those of Nippur, you'll find stone basins near latrine-like structures. Were these reserved for priests? For pilgrims? Or were they multipurpose rooms where cleansing rituals and bodily functions occurred in tandem? Scholars haven't nailed it down yet, but it's clear that bodily elimination was not divorced from spiritual life. One tablet fragment from the 18th century days contains what appears to be a list of ailments and their remedies, including the heavy belly, a delightful euphemism for constipation. It recommends a mixture of crushed date seeds, oni, and beer. You grimace slightly at the thought. It might not work fast, but hey, at least you'd be buzzed while waiting. And speaking of beer, some suggest that early Mesopotamians may have used beer dregs, a leftover grain, mash from brewing, as a cleansing agent, kind of like a proto-scrub meets soap. You imagine a sleepy Babylonian rubbing grain past on his hands and muttering about how it smells better than camel dung. Maybe. Now picture a bustling workshop. Scribes bent over clay tablets, artisans polishing cylinder seals, and in the back corner a narrow stairwell leading down to a cool, dark latrine. There, a stone platform over a pit, a jug of water nearby, and maybe a few palm fronds leaning against the wall. You step down into one of these spaces. The air is cooler, the silence thicker. A small oil lamp flickers. It's quiet, private, functional, and the brickwork, surprisingly clean. Someone took pride in building this. What makes Mesopotamian toilet culture stand out isn't that it was glamorous. It wasn't. But it was integrated into the design of the home, the fabric of the city, the pulse of the temple. People here understood that waste, if ignored, would fester not just physically, but cosmically. Cleanliness, in a place where gods walked among men, was an act of order. As you climb back up the steps into the sunlight, you pass a vendor hawking dried figs and another stirring a bubbling pot of barley porridge. And there right next to the bakery is a man pouring out a bucket into the street-side channel. Waste and water flow together, snaking down the lane toward a distant reed marsh where everything disappears. It's not glamorous, but it works. And you're reminded again, this civilization gave us writing, math, and astronomy. And tucked among the cuneiform tablets and star charts, the humble mechanics of everyday life, including how to wash up after a long day in the sun. You leave the dusty heat of the ancient Mesopotamian plains and step into a different climate, entirely lush, green, and humming with birdsong. You're in West Africa now, sometime between the 9th and 13th centuries, wandering into the early cities of the Sahel, Nok, Igbo Oku, perhaps even the great trading empire of Mali. And just as before, the question gently follows you, whispering on the wind, where did people go when they had to go? The answer, as always, depends on who you were and where you live. But in this corner of the world, one thing is clear: respect for the land shaped everything, even toileting. You find yourself in a Nok settlement, surrounded by clay homes with conical thatched roofs. Their walls are warm with the color of sun-baked earth, and the village hums with life, women grinding millet, children chasing goats, and elders seated beneath a tree, discussing the weather. You glance around discreetly and spot it tucked between two homes, behind a woven reed fancy pit latrine. It's simple, circular, and dug deep. Over the top, a wooden plank with a central hole, or in some cases, just a raised earthen mound. It may seem humble, but it's effective. In fact, pit latrines like these have stood the test of time in countless regions across Africa. What makes these facilities special isn't the tech, it's the care. Waste pits were carefully located away from water sources. Ash or dry leaves were scattered after use to reduce smell and promote composting. Families often mark their toilet areas with carved posts or clay statues to any ancestral guardians with serene faces or exaggerated features, quietly keeping watch. And here comes the scholarly twist. Historians still argue whether some of these markers had ritual meaning. Were they meant to protect users from spiritual harm? Or were they simply a way to designate a sacred boundary between clean and unclean? You crouch beside one carved figure, now weather-worn clay woman holding a bowl, and feel both possibilities stirring in the silence. In larger cities like Dijon or Timbuktu, things became more organized. Stone-lined latrines, drainage ditches, and even basic covered waste canals served growing populations. These weren't luxurious, far from it, but they were managed with intention. The dry climate helped. So did the availability of coarse grasses and tough leaves for wiping. And for washing, clay pots of water were often kept near toilet areas, refreshed daily. You now enter a royal compound, perhaps part of the Mali Empire, and find yourself in a walled courtyard where nobles once held council. At the rear is a slightly raised hut, its entrance partially hidden by intricately woven mats. Step inside, and you'll find a stone slab or ceramic pot recessed into the floor. A servant likely maintained it. You imagine the early emperors of Mali, robes trailing, quietly entering such a space before heading out to preside over gold caravans and diplomatic affairs. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day. In some oral traditions, it's said that kings and queens were attended even during toileting, not out of vanity, but to preserve their sacredness. Royalty was not to be alone in vulnerable moments. And their waste, collected carefully, then buried far from public view. A symbolic gesture, perhaps, of returning to the earth what came from divine bodies. Back in the villages, children were often taught to use the bush toil to respectful walk into the underbrush, with rules about digging shallow holes and covering one's traces. It was as much about hygiene as it was about respect for the ancestors believed to dwell in the land. The bush wasn't just wild, it was spiritual. You watch as an elder woman sprinkles ash into a pit latrine, murmuring something under her breath. Is it prayer? Habit? A chant to neutralize odor, or maybe spirits? You don't ask. You just listen. Water was precious here, but so was cleanliness. Before prayers, before meals, after toileting, water was used. Not lavishly, but thoughtfully. In desert-edge communities, sand or clay powder was sometimes substituted, used to scrub hands before rinsing them in the smallest of bowls. As you walk through the settlement, you're struck by how integrated it all feels. The toilet isn't an afterthought, hidden in shame. It's part of the flow of land, community, and spiritual life. It's managed communally, shared with care, cared for with reverence. And now, as the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, you pass a line of figures walking toward the fieldsmen, women, children carrying baskets, water jugs, and yes, perhaps a small shovel wrapped in cloth. They laugh, they talk, and they disappear behind the tall grasses to perform one of the oldest and most human acts on earth. Not in silence, not in shame, but in rhythm with the land. You step into the crisp, icy air of the northern tundra, where the sun barely rises in winter and the snow crunches underfoot like powdered glass. This is Viking country, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the land of fjords, longships, and fierce warriors. But even the hardiest of Vikings had to face the same uncomfortable reality: where to go when nature calls, especially in freezing temperatures. You trudge to the edge of a wooden longhousey communal home that shelters families and livestock alike. Outside, carved posts bearing runic inscriptions mark the boundaries of the settlement. Near the back, you spot a small wooden structure, a simple outhouse perched precariously on stilts over a shallow pit or even a flowing stream. Sometimes, in the heart of winter, waste would freeze in place. Not the most pleasant thought. You lift the creaky door and step inside. There's a wooden bench with a hole cut into it, and no privacy screens. The cold air rushes in through cracks and open slats, biting your skin. Vikings didn't fuss with much. Efficiency was the name of the game. Do your business. Get back inside to the fire. But wiping. Now here's where things get clever. In the absence of abundant soft materials, Vikings and their neighbors used moss. Specifically, sphagnum moss, soft, absorbent, and naturally antiseptic. You can almost imagine a mossy wad being carefully plucked, softened with water, and used to clean with surprising gentleness. The moss was then discarded or composted. Historians still argue whether moss was always locally gathered or sometimes traded, given its value for hygiene. What's clear is that it was the go-to bathroom accessory for northern peoples. And speaking of northern accessories, here's a quirky detail. Some Viking-era underwear has been found woven with yak hair, more likely, the hair of local mountain goats. This unusual fabric was prized for warmth and moisture wicking. So, when you imagine a Viking's daily routine, it's not just about bat leakses and meat. It's about layers of yak hair underwear, moss wiping, and dodging frostbite. Winter latrines were a particular challenge. When the ground froze solid, digging was impossible. Some settlements used snow-packed outhouses or simply waited for spring. Others made do with chamber pots, emptied into the snow outside an icy version of Gardlu. You now stand near a Viking longhouse's hearth, warmed by flickering flames and the aroma of smoked fish. Nearby, a servant empties a chamber pot into a shallow pit dug behind the building. The smell is brisk sharp with pine smoke and the tang of salt air. Inside, the communal nature of Viking life extended even to the bathroom. Longhouses often housed multiple families, and while some had private latrines, many shared their facilities. Privacy was a concept for later times, and hygiene wasn't forgotten. Hand washing was common, often using water heated by the fire and scented with herbs like juniper or pine needles. You imagine the ritual gently washing hands before meals, after toileting, perhaps even after tending to wounds. Now, for an unexpected bit of Viking lore, some sagas mention toilet battles, where feuding families would fling excrement at each other. Yes, an early form of biochemical warfare. You chuckle imagining frostbitten Vikings hurling steaming piles at rivals. A grim but effective insult. Beyond practicalities, Vikings had a rich mythology tied to bodily functions. Loki, the trickster god, was often associated with bodily humor and mischief. In some tales his escapades involve embarrassments and pranks involving, well, let's just say it wasn't always polite conversation. You step outside into the pale light and see a line of children playing in the snow, a dog bounding nearby. The settlement is alive, harsh, beautiful, raw. And somewhere in the distance, a lone figure squats over a mossy patch, eyes scanning the frozen horizon. After all, even warriors have to answer nature's call. You step into the polished, quiet halls of a modern museum, the air filled with a soft hum of climate control and the gentle footsteps of visitors. Around you, ancient artifacts glow behind glass cases, shards of pottery, carved statues, and, surprisingly, remnants of ancient toilets. Here, in these carefully curated exhibits, lies a hidden history one told not in epic battles or royal decrees, but in the humble remains of human waste and bathroom tools. You gaze at a Roman sponge stick, its wooden handle worn smooth by centuries of use. Nearby, a collection of ceramic pessoi from grease-worn pottery shards that once served a very personal function. Across the room, a manstone latrine seat is displayed beside inscriptions hinting at ritual purity. Archaeologists have long studied coprola's fossilized feces to understand diets, health, and even diseases of ancient peoples. These silent witnesses reveal everything from what our ancestors ate to the parasites they endured. They speak louder than many written records. You pass a wall adorned with graffiti taken from ancient latrines, insults, jokes, drawings of philosophy, and political slogans. Bathroom humor, it seems, transcends millennia. Someone has thoughtfully translated a Roman quip, "Here sits Marcus, who thinks he is a god but smells like a sewer." You chuckle quietly. The museum curator points out an inscription found in a medieval garderobe, "To whom it may concern, please aim well and mind the pigeons." Even centuries ago, humans struggled with aiming accuracy and pest control. And of course, there's the eternal mystery of the Roman sponge stick, the tersorium. Some scholars argue it was personal, others insist it was shared, cleaned only in salt water or vinegar. The debate rages, fueled by the thought of communal hygiene gone wild. As you wonder, you realize how much bathroom culture tells us about civilization. Toilets and their paraphernalia are intimate windows into daily life, social hierarchy, engineering skill, and even spirituality. They reveal what societies value: privacy or community, cleanliness or ritual, innovation or tradition. You stop at a display about the Indus Valley civilization. A reconstructed brick-lined drainage system sprawls before you, testimony to early urban sanitation. Nearby, a video shows the careful layering of ash and soil in ancient pit latrines, highlighting ancient waste management as an early form of recycling. The curator whispers a final thought: every culture's approach to waste reflects its relationship with nature, community, and the body itself. It's humbling to realize how the very human need to relieve oneself has shaped, and been shaped by, culture across the ages. You exit the exhibit, stepping back into the modern world. As you go, you glance down at your own porcelain throne with newfound appreciation, a marvel of engineering, privacy, and cleanliness that took millennia to perfect. And if you ever feel self-conscious about your bathroom habits, just remember, you're part of a long, unbroken line stretching back to the first clay pots, stone seats, and daring innovators who flushed waste into rivers, composted it for crops, or just hoped it would go away quietly. You smile. Human nature is messy, beautiful, and endlessly inventive. And that's a perfect note to end our journey. As you settle back into your chair, or perhaps the very throne you occupy now, take a deep breath in. Feel the gentle rhythm of your body. The story of humanity's bathroom journey is more than just about waste. It's about innovation, adaptation, and the quiet dignity in meeting our most basic needs. From the Nile's crocodile done to the mossy outhouses of the Vikings, every culture has found its own way to weave the practical into the spiritual, the personal into the communal. Toilets and latrines may seem humble, but they tell profound stories of civilization, stories of water flowing through clay pipes, of sponges shared or scorned, of rituals that cleanse not just the body but the soul. Think of the ancient engineers who crafted drainage systems long before flush toilets. Imagine the artisans who carved toilet seats not just for comfort, but as symbols of status and care. Remember the humble moss picked from snowy forests, or the recycled papers of distant dynasties. Each choice, each innovation, a thread in the tapestry of human life. And now, as you relax into the quiet night, let the soft hum of the fan, or the gentle rustle of leaves lull you. Let the past remind you that even in moments of solitude and simplicity, we are connected to those who came before and those who will come after. So breathe slowly. Feel the ease of relief, the peace of privacy, and the comfort of knowing you're a part of an ancient, unending story. Sweet dreams.